In this lesson, we're going to walk through an example that will demonstrate the behavior of the post filter annotation. The post filter annotation behaves very similarly to the pre-filter annotation, but there's one big difference. First, both are used for filtering a collection, but the post filter will filter a returned collection as opposed to an argument like pre-filter. So what are we talking about here? First, let's just go within our appointment controller and we see the GetAppointments method. And when we look at this method, we see its return type is list of appointments. And we see we're using our repository to just return all of the appointments for a particular user. Now, this is very great. It's very efficient, but we're going to modify this method to, instead of filtering all of the appointments returned, to just return all of the appointments from the repository. And then we're going to use the post filter annotation to filter that list and whittle it down to those that are relevant or owned by our authenticated user. So first, let's just take a look at what we're going to see now. And we've actually seen this in past demonstrations. So I'm just going to sign in as KBowerSox with a password. Once our server restarts and we're in, we're going to see that we get these 2 appointments within this list. The way this page works, it invokes that method we were just looking at, and that method returns the appointments. Now we're going to add the post filter annotation, and this annotation accepts an expression as a value. So since we're using expressions, we can reference our currently logged in principal, and we can get the auto user ID from that principal. And then when we're referring to the items in the returned collection, we use filter object, and that expression will evaluate to each individual appointment within the list. So you know the filter object is always the type of the generic type of your collection. And knowing that we're working with an appointment, we can get the user, and the user has an auto user ID. So what will happen is when Spring Security detects this post filter annotation, after this method has evaluated, it will then look at the collection returned by this method, and it will evaluate this expression for each object within the collection. And that's going to determine whether or not it is then actually returned. So let's restart our server and we'll run through our example that's using post filter to whittle down this collection of appointments. So I'll go back and let's just navigate to our appointments URL. Let's see if it keeps us logged in here. There we go. And now we see that we just get the single appointment that corresponds with our logged in user, which is the KBowerSox user. Now let's talk a little bit about this. I wouldn't advocate for this approach. What if we had 3 million users? You want to handle that sort of work in your database by performing a query that filters down to those individual records for that user. You want to be using a where clause with a predicate as opposed to relying upon Spring Security's post filter annotation to do this check. But what it is good for is once you do that check where you're using a more specific query against your repository, you can then confirm that they do all in fact comply with the authorization measures that you'd like to put in place on that collection being returned. So in this lesson, we took a look at the post filter annotation provided by Spring Security and how it allows us to reduce the items returned in a collection of a method.